My roommate is part of a cult. He's trying to get into my room right now. I don't know if I'll have time to finish this. If someone finds my phone, the password is 2746. You can take everything, just please post this somewhere. Anywhere. They can't do this to anyone else. His name is Rana. When I moved in, he was just a quiet guy with a black backpack and hollow eyes. Never smiled. Never left his room after 2 a.m. I thought he was just an introvert. But last night, while he was in the shower, I heard something coming from his room. Not music. Not a conversation. It was a prayer. Repeated, almost sobbing, in a language that shouldn't exist. I recorded a bit of it. I'm too scared to listen again. There are symbols scratched beneath his bed. I found my name in one of them, written in blood. I didn't know how to react. I freaked out and tried to ignore Rana. Earlier tonight, the doorknob turned slowly. No knocking. No calling my name. Just turning, like he was checking if I was still awake. I ran and locked the door, pushed the dresser against it. The sound stopped, but now there are footsteps in the hallway. He's pacing back and forth. Sometimes he stops right in front of the door, just stands there silent, then goes back to the kitchen. Except, I heard two voices. One was his. The other one, I don't know. Couldn't be the TV, it's impossible. There's someone else here. Maybe more than one. I didn't hear the front door open, let alone close. Someone got in and I don't know how. Rana isn't alone. I don't know what they're planning. I don't know if they're planning something for me. I never should have found out. I live on the 3rd floor. No one gets in through the window. But maybe I'll have to go out that way. I just called the police. The operator told me to stay calm. Said they're sending a patrol. But I know this neighborhood. It'll take time. Maybe too much time. I tried texting my sister. Just a simple something's wrong. But the message wouldn't send. Then my screen froze. Not cracked. Not glitched. Just stuck. Like something didn't want me to speak out. When it finally cleared, all my past messages with her were gone. Like I never had a conversation with her in the first place. I told myself it was panic, that I was imagining things. But then the lights flickered, not like a power surge. Every bulb dimmed at once. Slow, deliberate. Like the entire apartment was holding its breath. The window's too high to just jump. I don't know if I'll make it, so I'm leaving this here. They're trying to break in, pounding, like they're ready to tear the door off its hinges. If I disappear, I want someone to find this. I want someone to understand what's going on, what they're doing. I can't be the only one. One more time. His name is Rana. We live at 1342 Hollow Creek Drive, Building 3, Apt 204, in Portland, Oregon. He's white, 5 feet 10 inches, blonde hair, and eyes that never seem to blink. He might look harmless, but he's not. Please find them. The dresser won't hold much longer. The keepsake. It was grotesque. That is the only way I could describe it. A vision of hell. It was a painting, if you could call it that. Red smeared darkness as a background and what I can only assume was supposed to be a demon. It was gnawing on the stomach of a naked person whose face twisted with horror. One of those medieval paintings about hell that make you want to start going to church. I remember the first time my wife hung it in the foyer, and after a brief protest upon its existence, I realized there was no use in fighting it being hung. "It is a keepsake," she would exclaim. Whatever that means. I could hardly stand to look at it. But what bothered me the most is how my wife would stare at it, as though it was her first and true love, admiring its handiwork more than anything I dare try to create to match. I even attempted to paint my own oil canvas with red and black, but she refused to acknowledge it even after several attempts. "I know what you're trying to do," she'd say. "We are not getting rid of that painting. It's a keepsake." "It gives me bad vibes, Margot," I continued. "I don't know how to explain it, but it makes me sick." "You're being overdramatic," she quipped. "Where did you even get it? A slaughterhouse? Is that even red paint?" She giggled. "It's a keepsake." I started to think it was a bad joke. Every time I would enter or leave, there it was, and oftentimes there was my wife marveling at it. I can't place the time she must have gotten the painting, or maybe she kept it a secret. But one snowy, rotten cold day, it was heaved onto the wall to my dismay. "You really shouldn't find it creepy," laughed Margot. "It likes your skin." "Stop it." I shuddered. There was something about this image. No matter the time of day or light on the image, it always seemed to be visible, like shadows feared crossing it. Almost a full year, and after one unusually heated argument on its mere placement, I finally got up the courage to scowl deeply at the smudge work she seemed to obsess over. "She must have paid a pretty penny for you," I started. "Because I cannot fathom what she sees in you." I followed the longest red paint smear from left to right, scouring for any hint of value when the paint seemed to drip. "That must be it. It's an optical illusion," I said triumphantly. "Or I've gone mad." I reached out to touch the paint that dripped, and it felt wet and actually stuck to my finger. As I looked upon my red-stained fingertip, I felt wind ripple by, as if someone had passed me, and even saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye. Before I glanced behind me, I first looked up towards the painting. Somehow the movement seemed to come from it. "Must be too much moisture in the room," said my wife from behind me as I almost hit the ceiling in fright. "I'll go turn off the humidifier." "Okay," I stuttered. I, for some reason, was still facing the painting, as if there was still more to see, as if I was afraid to now turn my back to it. I avoided the foyer altogether, even going as far as to leave out the garage even if I was not taking the car out. My wife's obsession seemed to become more obscene, also. She had moved her art supplies into the foyer so she could work in front of it, but every time I would peek around the corner at her, she was simply staring at the atrocity she called art. "It inspires me," she said. After several weeks, I asked where her finished pieces were going. She told me she was selling them up before she even finished them. All commissions. I asked her what the commissions were of, and she replied, "Portraits. All of them from photographs." I finally built up the courage one day to call her bluff. After she had left to go on an errand upon my request, I went into the foyer. My heart raced as I approached her easels and brush stand. First, I found the photographs the commissions would be based on. After much inspection, however, I could not find any paintings except for the one still on the easel. The easel was still covered, but I slowly removed its covering. Underneath was a pastel painting of a man's torso with no background. As I stared at it, I noticed the shirt on the torso was red like mine, and even the body type was somewhat. The phone rang. It was a lady on the other end. She said, "Hello. How do you do? I responded to your advertisement on pastel portraits, and I have yet to receive my commission yet. It has been several weeks, and I was promised it would be finished yesterday." "Well, that's odd. I am not the artist, but the artist is my wife, and I dash." The woman interrupted with a gasp. "I'm sorry," she stuttered. "Something is staring into my kitchen window." "Something?" I asked. "Why, yes," she sounded shaken up. "Are you okay?" No response on the other line. "Hello," I said, but when there was no response for a minute, I hung up. My wife returned home, and before I could ask her about the woman's painting, she was already sitting down to paint. "I have a lot of commissions to finish," she said, exasperated. I left her to finish, and assumed she must have to finish the commission the woman spoke of. Later that night, as the moon became shrouded in dark clouds, I heard something coming from the foyer. The mere existence of the painting made me weary, so I cautiously crept to the stairs to peer into the room where it hung. There stood my wife, covered in paint from the day's work. Her arms outstretched, caressing, and she was humming a lullaby to the painting. I wanted to vomit, but before I could sneer at what I could only assume was a bad joke, she grabbed a painting off the easel, so I remained hidden. She turned towards the painting, arms outstretching, holding a painting to the other painting. "A special treat," she whispered. I couldn't believe my eyes. In her grasp she held a painting of none other than me. My stomach turned into knots. I wanted to double over in pain. I saw a flash of movement in the painting like before, but this time I clearly saw the reach of two gnarled, soot-darkened arms reach through the painting and grasp the painting of me she offered. I turned and ran back upstairs. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat in the dark, breathing heavily. The moon started to peek out through the clouds, shining a light into the room. As I looked over to the window, a jolt of electricity shot through my spine as I saw a face staring back at me in the window. The twisted, red-eyed, fanged smile of the demon from the painting. I crawled back to the door and threw open the doors. I ran until I came to a library. I don't know how much longer I have left, but if you're reading this, please destroy it. The House of Wishes. Anthony White let his gaze rest upon the frozen surface of the pond before him. He was uncomfortably aware of the hushed voices coming from the dozens of young boys standing behind him at the southernmost edge of the irregularly shaped pool of ice. His friends were amongst them, he knew, holding up handwritten signs of support while occasionally calling out, "You can do it!" and "We believe in you!" However, Anthony was sure that the vast majority of the boys were hoping to see him fail his mission, giving them the ability to brag about having seen the infamous pond swallow a child whole. He supposed there might be a few kids who wanted to see him succeed, if only to find out whether the old hut across the water really was magical or not, but they were probably the ones who still had yet to be disillusioned about the existence of the Tooth Fairy. Taking in a cold, steadying breath, Anthony shifted his focus to the modest, red-roofed wooden structure on the opposite side of the pond, about 60 yards away. The hut, along with the pond itself, was backed into a hollow section of the mountain, with high, vertical stony walls that made it almost impossible to approach the hut except for via the body of water. The building was formally named the Amberson Hut after the family that owned it, but was more colloquially known as the House of Wishes. It was there that Anthony hoped to receive the one thing his heart truly desired above everything else: the return of his brother Scott. According to the legend, the House of Wishes had occupied that space for longer than anyone could remember. Even the Amberson family wasn't sure who had built the hut, or when and how it came to be passed down to their ancestors. During warmer months, the Ambersons were easily able to access the hut by boat and see to the property's upkeep. A couple of them would even spend a few nights there, enjoying the serene solitude of the place. The family noted that there was nothing special about the place other than its reputation, but that did nothing to quell the superstitions surrounding the hut and its pond. It was said that the pond was unusually deep for its size. Some of the more extreme speculations put it as deep enough to submerge an entire skyscraper. As Anthony had heard it, no one had ever been able to retrieve anything once it had sunk into the pond. Even human bodies, once taken into the water's depths, never returned to the surface. Every now and then, someone not related to the Ambersons would try rowing out to the hut in order to satisfy his own curiosity about the place, only to give up after a few yards because of an intense feeling of dread and the suddenly real possibility of sinking into the eternal murky, watery grave. Fishing could be pretty good there, but most locals chose to fish in less dangerous locations. Most of the time, it was said, the House of Wishes really was just a simple hut attached to a haunted pool of water. However, some desperate man had long ago discovered that the hut would gain the power to grant a person's deepest wish under two conditions. The pond must be completely frozen over by the 30th of December, and the pond must be crossed by foot to get to the hut before the first day of the new year. It was said that this man had made the discovery after having gotten himself lost in the middle of a freak snowstorm, looking for a way to shelter himself away from the frosty elements. He had spotted the red roof of the little hut. Knowing nothing about the curious nature of the pond, he ventured across its frozen surface without fear and entered the small building. This, as it was told, was where he was granted his greatest wish, which led to the establishment of the town that Anthony called home. Throughout the generations, many had tried to cross the ice in the hopes of having their greatest wish granted, only to have the pond's solid shell crack beneath them and plunge them into the deadly waters. Supposedly, the only known success stories involved 12-year-old boys, which was why it became a tradition for that age group to take up the challenge. Even though the pond so rarely froze over by the requisite date that sometimes decades passed before the right conditions were met, every year a single 12-year-old boy was chosen to represent his cohorts at the pond for this rite of passage. Usually, this was a symbolic position, and the chosen Wishwalker would preside over a massive snowball fight held amongst the town's youth near the pond. Anthony, this year's Wishwalker by choice rather than by chance, took a step forward and placed his cleated right foot onto the pond's surface. The whispers and occasional shouts coming from behind him suddenly went silent. Not even the sounds of respiration could be heard, as the boys seemed to be holding their breath with anticipation. Anthony kept his own breathing steady as he set his left foot ahead of the right. With grim determination, he balled his sweaty fists within his green woolen mittens, stiffened his jaw the way he'd always seen his dad do before handling a difficult task, and then proceeded to walk at a slow and careful pace across the ice. He wondered briefly if he had been stupid to volunteer himself for what was essentially a suicide mission, but then remembered the promise he'd made to his brother. This, he thought, was the right thing to do. Of course, most of his classmates disagreed. Most notoriously, Ben Archer, the fittest of all the preteen boys in town, had mocked Anthony's decision throughout the fall, referring to him as the Death Wishwalker. Although all the boys in his age group presented themselves as willing if chosen, nobody actually wanted to walk the ice in the event that the pond froze over in time. When he had volunteered himself at the start of the school year, the other kids had called him crazy and had accused him of being a baby for believing that a simple hut could grant him a wish. Naturally, nobody objected to him taking on the role of Wishwalker if he so desired, and much of the bite was taken out of the autumn games that would usually decide who would walk the pond. The Wishwalker was always the boy who scored the least amount of points overall. Ben Archer had never been at risk. "Hey, Death Wishwalker, down here." Ben's voice seemed to come from below Anthony's feet. Despite the impossibility of Ben trying to get his attention from under the ice, Anthony looked down. He came to an abrupt halt as he saw the specter of a drowned man floating just beneath the frozen surface. The ghost's sightless eyes bore into him as he spoke again, this time using what was presumably his own voice. "If death is your wish, come let me show you the way." The man held out his hands, opening his arms as though ready to catch something from above. Anthony felt hot panic rising into his throat and, just beyond the sounds of his quickened heartbeat pounding in his ears, he heard the distinct sounds of ice cracking beneath the weight of his feet. The urge to turn and run back to safety almost took over his body, even though he knew that he would never make it. He could now see a crack forming on the ice along the side of his left foot, which looked just as ominous as the dead man's grin. His breaths were coming in short gasps now, and he felt on the verge of fainting. "Yo, bro!" shouted a voice from up ahead. Anthony was shocked and relieved to see his brother Scott waving to him from the front of the hut. His fragile body was clothed in nothing but a hospital gown, but he looked feverish nonetheless. "All you gotta do is put one foot in front of the other, remember?" Anthony did remember. He recalled those days so long ago when he and Scott used to pretend to walk the pond together, while he was helping his big brother with physical therapy. This was back when Scott's health had seemed to be rallying and everyone had thought he would be okay, before things took a turn for the worst and Scott ended up being sent away to a place of rest. Scott had thought that he would become well enough that he would be included in the upcoming year's autumn games, but not well enough to win many points. As such, he had thought it would be prudent to practice pond walking ahead of time. Anthony remembered how he and his brother would try to imagine the grandest wish possible each night before bed, which they would then focus on during their pond walk the following day. They had dreamed big in those days, going far beyond wealth and love and long life. They had wanted superpowers and galactic battles and resurrected dinosaurs. The list had gone on forever, but now none of that mattered. Looking at his brother across the pond, Anthony could hardly believe that he had ever thought there was anything more important than the reason he needed to reach the hut today. Keeping his eyes on Scott, Anthony set his jaw firm once again and took a step forward, wincing a little as the ice creaked beneath him. One foot in front of the other, he thought as he steadied his breathing and resumed his careful pace. He felt himself start to tremble with cold as a chill seemed to creep up his body from the frosty surface beneath his feet. He continued walking forward, just wanting to reach his brother, but feeling more and more frigid the further he went. Finally, having progressed just beyond the halfway point of his journey, he realized that he could no longer feel his toes. He looked down. Below him, the ice of the pond's surface, previously opaque, had become completely transparent. The dense, dark murkiness of the pond's waters was suddenly removed, affording him a view into its eternal depths. Spaced throughout this bottomless pool were the floating bodies of the countless men, women, and children who had been claimed by the pond over the years. Their upturned faces smiled at him in welcome and, with the surface of the pond all but invisible to him, Anthony could imagine that he was already submerged with them. The ice cracked. "Bro," Scott's voice rang out to him, sounding slightly alarmed. "Remember your promise." Anthony remembered. He closed his eyes, he moved his feet forward, and he remembered. He remembered holding Scott's hand on that last day before the transfer, that final day before he would no longer get to see his brother. He remembered looking into his brother's sunken, tired eyes and vowing to bring him back home by walking the pond. He remembered and he walked and he cried, and the ice creaked and cracked. "Well done, bro. You made it." Anthony opened his eyes. His feet now stood on blessed solid ground and the House of Wishes stood only a few yards in front of him. Scott wasn't there. The frosted surface of the pond behind him looked just as white and untouched as it had before he'd stepped onto it. He could see the boys across the pond jumping around and yelling with excitement, though he could hear nothing but silence. Without further ado, Anthony walked over to the red-roofed hut, held his breath, and opened the door.